He talked to a tree, thinking it was the Prussian monarch Frederick. He swore foully, lunged at people with his fists, harassed women who happened to be nearby, and mistook them for his wife. It got to the point where, during his fits, doctors had to put him in a straitjacket. George III had suffered from a mental disorder since his youth, and in the final years of his reign, he went completely mad. George III was the King of England during the era of its greatest prosperity and its greatest problems. It was during this time that the American War of Independence took place. The events of the French Revolution also occurred during his reign, when his kinsman, the King of France, was executed. And it was during his reign that the most terrible war between England and the rest of the world, known as the Napoleonic Wars, occurred. And by 1810, it became clear that the king was mad. The first fit occurred when George was 27 years old. At first, they were very rare. Even his wife, Charlotte, was unaware of anything for a long time. But from about the age of 50, the mental disorder began to progress rapidly. But why? Researchers from the University of Kent studied biological material from the deceased monarch and came to a conclusion. The king was being regularly poisoned. A team led by Professor Martin Warren discovered that the concentration of arsenic exceeded the norm by 17 times. They figured this out by studying the remains of the king's hair, which were stored in the Science Museum in London. But who was slowly killing George III, and why? According to historians, family members and people from his inner circle did not wish for the king's death. Therefore, researchers lean towards the version that the ruler was poisoned by accident when they were trying to cure him. Perhaps it was a consequence of the arsenic content in the medicines he was treated with. A similar case occurred in Russian history with Ivan the Terrible. At the very least, the poisoning became a major cause of his madness. History knows many cases where rulers had arsenic mixed into their food and drinks specifically for the purpose of murder. The most famous dynasty of poisoners is the Florentine Medici family. They sent many political opponents to their graves, including relatives. Historians are certain. The sudden death of the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Francesco de' Medici, occurred with the active involvement of his brother, Ferdinando. His relative, Catherine de' Medici, the wife of the French monarch Henry II, was nicknamed the Black Queen. It was rumored that she poisoned Francis, her husband's older brother, to clear Henry's path to the throne. Rumor also attributed the murder of her own son to her. Catherine de' Medici was known for bringing her collection of Italian poisons to France, along with Italian artists. She had a famous apothecary who was responsible for preparing these poisons. There is a legend that she wanted to poison King Henry of Navarre, who was the husband of Queen Margot, because he was a Protestant. According to rumors, to deal with her son-in-law, the Dowager Queen soaked the pages of a book on falconry with poison and sent it to Henry of Navarre as a gift. But it so happened that her son, the young King Charles IX, saw the tome first. He was also a great lover of hunting and began to flip through the pages with curiosity, moistening his fingers with saliva. A few days later, Charles died. However, scientists consider this sinister story to be extremely doubtful, because it is known that Charles IX suffered from tuberculosis and died at the age of 24, most likely from its complications. But this legend is extremely romanticized in France. Much more often, assassination attempts on crowned heads were made not with poison, but with weapons in hand. Sometimes the weapon was quite exotic. For example, the Russian Emperor Paul the Fool died at the hands of conspirators after Count Nikolai Zubov hit him on the head with a snuffbox. While Paul, who was attacked in his bedroom, tried to defend himself, the Danish king Erik V died in his sleep. He didn't even have time to understand anything. In 1286, Erik V died absurdly during his own hunt. After it ended, he retired to his royal tent, which a group of monks entered at sunset. It was later revealed that it was these monks who stabbed the king to death in his sleep as he rested after the hunt. Of course, these were not clergymen at all, but mercenaries in cassocks. But who paid for the monarch's murder, and why? Suspicion fell on Marshal Stig Andersen. The Danes quickly convicted a nobleman nicknamed Hvid because he hated the ruler for having seduced his wife in the past. The Danish parliament found Andersen and several other nobles guilty of the king's death and exiled them from the country. After this, according to legend, the former military commander and his friends settled on the island of Hjelm, and their lives became full of danger and adventure. Consequently, the characters of this event became famous pirates and, for a long time after, were heroes of Danish epic poetry. Perhaps the most inglorious death was that of the medieval English monarch, Edmund Ironside. According to the most common version, he was stabbed to death in his own privy. The king spent only 6 months on the throne, but became famous for his stubborn resistance to the expansion of the Danes, led by King Canute the Great, for which he earned his nickname. Edmund won 3 major battles against the Northerners, including liberating London. And after a feast dedicated to the victory over the Vikings, he retired to his royal privy, where he met his death. He was stabbed with swords or shot with a crossbow. Of course, it was an absurd and extremely regrettable death, though it probably hints that he was not beloved by everyone in his own army, because it's unlikely the Vikings stabbed and killed him. Assassination attempts on monarchs are by no means a thing of the distant past, as it might seem. In 1983, there was a plan to kill the British Queen Elizabeth II during her visit to California. This is stated in documents that the FBI declassified last year. Information about the threat was received on February 4, 1983, a month before the visit of Queen Elizabeth and her husband, Philip. A police officer who frequented an Irish pub received information from one of the patrons that an assassination attempt was being prepared against the Queen. He wanted to take revenge on the Queen for his daughter, who was killed with a rubber bullet in Northern Ireland. The FBI leadership took these threats very seriously. At that time, there was an active confrontation between the British authorities and a paramilitary group called the Irish Republican Army, IRA. Historians call this period the Troubles. Under the slogans of fighting for independence, Irish radicals carried out numerous terrorist attacks, including the murder of Prince Philip's uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten. In 1979, Lord Mountbatten was blown up during a trip on his own yacht with his children. This shocked the royal family, the Queen herself and her husband, Prince Philip, so much that security for the royal family was drastically tightened. In February 1983, FBI agents concluded that an Irish radical would most likely try to kill Elizabeth by dropping an explosive device from the Golden Gate Bridge onto the royal yacht Britannia as the vessel passed underneath. This was a prime example of real international terrorists who, considering themselves fighters for a just cause, were hunting specifically for the head of the English state. And their primary targets were not government officials, but representatives of the royal family, because they were perceived as historical oppressors from when England, accordingly, captured Ireland as an island. During the royal couple's visit to California, American Special Services organized a whole complex of security measures. Most of them have not been disclosed to this day. The only thing known for sure is that the Golden Gate Bridge was closed for the period when the yacht with the honored guests was passing under it. Tragedy was averted that time, but members of the British royal family are still in the risk zone. American Special Services have found out that Thomas Crooks, who shot at Donald Trump in July 2024, was also planning an assassination attempt on a relative of Charles III. The name of the potential victim is not being disclosed.